We note, in terms of the changing world, we are now into a period where fourth industrial revolution is not even an option anymore that we have to think about. It has been forced upon us with the COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore we need to be adapting to those changes. In this instance, this global perspective that we would like to hear about in terms of what implications does this have on the world of work. And to tell us more about that is the Chief Technical Advisor for Employment Intensive Investment Program with the International Labour Organization, Mr. Gamelihle Sibanda. Welcome, Mr. Sibanda. Just for safety purposes, let me sanitize the screen before you can join us.
Good morning, one and all. My name is Gamelihle Sibanda, as you have been told. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a global perspective of the fourth industrial revolution implications in the world of work. I'm not going to focus on the definition of what 4IR is. I assume you're already aware of that. But I'm going to focus on the issues that we have witnessed and are emerging. All right, so let's start with what we already knew about the future of work. When I say what you already knew, you will recall that our own president of South Africa and the Prime Minister of Sweden co-chaired a commission which looked at the future of work, and this was organized by the International Labour Organization. And already some of the findings we knew. When I say already, I'm talking here pre-COVID, because COVID is kind of like pressed down on the accelerator, and things that maybe we thought would happen in 5-10 years, some of them have already manifested. But what we already knew at the time is that there would be technological changes both inside and outside the workspace. And also we knew that automation of repetitive work tasks would progressively be happening. We also knew that there would also be a transition to remote working. This has already been the trend. And also we knew that progressively in the workspace, we would see people perhaps not working full-time, some of them, but rather working as what is known as independent contractors. And the other thing we knew was that there would be job obsolescence. I recall in the UK, I saw an announcement that by 2025, they would have shut down all their coal mines, which meant that there would be no one called a coal miner anymore. I know we're still building them in South Africa, but there will come a time, or there will be certain job categories that will disappear forever, that we'll never hear about again. But also there will be new categories. For instance, we now have what are called social media managers, titles which didn't exist a few years ago. Maybe we now have influencers and other titles that are becoming more and more ubiquitous. And we also know that there will be job substitution. For instance, if you are working in a landfill, collecting material for recycling, and a decision is made at a corporate level to collect, say, waste at source and take it to a recycling plant, those people working at the recycling plant are not the same people who are working at the landfill. So we are going to have more and more of these kind of job substitutions. Also job transformation. People who are doing certain tasks, having to upskill themselves to do new tasks. For instance, if I take a simple task like someone may be installing electric geysers, and then all of a sudden, they now have to be retrained to install solar geysers. So we knew that as we transition to the fourth industrial revolution, we would have these kind of changes. And then what did COVID do? Well, we had the lockdowns, we had social distancing, we had co-location of the work, the school, and the home. All of a sudden, all those things came under one roof. And also we had immediate transition to, in fact, I wouldn't even call it transformation to a remote working context. And we needed to immediately upgrade our technology to continue working, those of us who could work remotely. There was also the need to upskill the workers so that they can then function in this new context under pandemic conditions. But it wasn't only that, you also had to be a tutor to your own children, you had to take care of your loved ones, and at the same time, cook for the kids, because all of a sudden you are not able to send them to a creche. And then now you are also having to be on Zoom yourself and be able to attend to your colleagues. If I can then move forward and look ahead, having spoken about what we know, now we're entering uncharted waters. For instance, those of us who are working from home, some of us went and sat on our dining chairs, which are not economically proper. And now we're having back pains and all sorts of things. I had a nice, comfortable chair at work with all the adjustments. Now I'm sitting on my hard dining table. And who is going to pay for me to buy a proper one? What about the internet, the data that I'm now using? Are all employers subsidizing their employees with data? Or you have to chip in with your own data? What about the electricity? Now you have to have your generator on standby if you are going to attend that important Zoom meeting. And who is paying for that generator when you have to run it? And even some of the issues which we consider very probably minute, the water, now you're at home, you're flushing, all the flushing you are doing at home, the tissue you're using at home is now to be paid by yourself. Previously, your employer was paying for all this. Who has to pay for this going forward? Also, if you think about it, when you are working online, you're on Zoom, the employer doesn't exactly know what you're up to. You may be logged in, but you could be cooking, multitasking. You just turn off your microphone and do other things. So the employers, some of them are saying, hang on, maybe we should be paying you not for working from 8 to 4 or 8 to 5, but we'll pay you for what you have actually produced. So we are likely to see more and more employers requiring that people be paid for what they've produced rather than the hours worked. And this is going to obviously introduce a completely new dynamic that we are not used to. Automation of certain work processes. Things that were done by supervisors, now the automation will take over and supervise you, check when you submit your outputs and all that. And some people may be hired for specific tasks because the employer will say, hang on, if I can't see what you're up to, I cannot pay you for being around the whole day. I'll only pay you when I know exactly what you're doing. So I'll only need you for what I can prove you can do. And then what will this introduce? Because people's income is going to reduce then if that were to happen. So we could see someone working for multiple employers in one day. And that immediately raises the question, how do you protect things like intellectual property if an employee is working for maybe 10 employees in a month? So these are all areas that we don't have answers to. Currently, we have labor inspectors who will come to a factory and ensure that proper working conditions are adhered to. But if we are now moving the factory to your kitchen table and things like that, what will this do for worker rights? What about non-unionized workers who had the support of the unions? Now you are working from your bedroom in your pajamas. Who is going to protect you? What about dispute resolution? How is this going to happen? If you are on Zoom doing dispute resolution on Zoom, and then your computer freezes whilst your mouth is open, the person thinking on the other side, they're like, this one is laughing. They don't take this case seriously. Meanwhile, you just had a connectivity problem that prevented you from articulating yourself. What about medical insurance? What about our pension? So all these are questions that, unfortunately, we don't have answers to. But let me try and spend more time on then where should we go on this? How do we then react to this? One of the things is that whatever we do, I think we really need to think hard about ensuring sustainability. And here, when I talk sustainability, I'm talking about sustainability in its broad sense. For instance, we want sustainability in terms of actions or policies that are politically supported, that are socially acceptable, institutionally possible, technologically appropriate, economically viable, financially sound, and of course, environmentally sound. So these are all the dimensions of sustainability that we need to think about to ensure that whatever we do, we are not compromising, obviously, the viability of those businesses that we have to support the workers, but also the rights of the worker at the workplace is not compromised by this transformation to a remote working context. So we also have to recognize that there will be different outcomes for different demographics. We can't have a one-size-fit-all approach to whatever we do. So we have, for instance, groups that are vulnerable when we talk working remotely, there are some people who don't even have a smartphone, let alone the access to data. So sometimes we speak about this transformation to a remote working context as if everybody is going to have this access. So I think it's important to recognize the different resource endowments of members of our community. And therefore, we need to ensure that we use the approach which says, leave no one behind. I grew up watching American movies, and I remember one of them was in Vietnam. When the soldiers were killed or were injured, the others would carry the injured one to the helicopter to be flown away to safety. And it always amazed me until I realized that, of course, that was only possible in the movies. But I think as we craft our policies and interventions, we must always bear in mind the need for social justice and ensure that we aim for what in the ILO we call a just transition. So a just transition means that, yes, fine, we are going to make adjustment and changes. But when we make those adjustments and changes, we must ensure that the end result does not leave anybody worse off than they were before we intervened at the systemic level. All right, so I think I've come to the end of my presentation. I would like to give back a few remaining minutes so that maybe they can be used for cleaning up for the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sibanda, for your very insightful inputs in respect of the changes that we are now having to deal with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, things such as your furniture, those are some of the simplest things that we take for granted in terms of whether do they need to even adapt for your home? Do you need to have that nice, comfortable chair so that you're able to relax and be comfortable when you're interacting at home? Simple things like the cost of sanitation. I mean, the price of tissues, as we've known, have gone up. So those are some of the additional costs that we're now having to incur as individuals that are now having to work from home, changing the world of work, the way in which we're doing things, the new norm, as we're now calling it. As indicated on our social media platforms, there's quite engagements that we would like to get from you, your comments, your input, any questions that you may want to pose to our presenters here. You can send them through, as I've indicated on Twitter. We have our hashtag Salga Labor Law Seminar, Salga LLS. Those are our hashtags. So if you could kindly just post your questions there.
So the question I picked up was the implications for worker rights. Some of them I alluded to in my presentation. I think one of the biggest concerns, obviously, in the future of work, especially if you are working remotely, is that most of these workers, as they are working maybe from their bedroom in their pajamas, you are pretty much alone. You know, the strength of workers is in their numbers, being unionized, having other people to share or co-lobby with you. So now if you are alone, you are isolated and vulnerable. So definitely the unions themselves, we have seen the number of subscribers of unions going down over the years, telling us that the transformation to the new work context means that even the unions themselves need to organize in a different way. And even picketing might not necessarily mean taking a placard and going to do toi-toi to demonstrate your grievance, but you might have to toi-toi online as well. So these are some of the things I think that will need to happen. And the other concern, of course, is one where you are paid for the output. On the surface, there is nothing wrong with being paid for the output, but it may be such that then the income you are able to derive becomes so low you are not able to sustain yourself. Because then if all the work you have to do has to be quantifiable and be measured as an output, for some people, they might even do more but be paid less for that. And then the other question was the issue of soft skills. What soft skills do you require to be working in this context? I think the most important soft skill we all need is communication skills. If you are going to be working, for instance, in a remote context, you can't be shy. unfortunately, yes, there are people shy, but it means that you might be forced sometimes to turn on your camera, talk to strangers, people you have never met, because now you are able to interact with people in different corners of the world. And so you need to brace yourself for the ability to function and interact with people you have never met before. So you have to up your communication skills. But also the patience is important. If you are working in a remote context, I think this one is especially to the bosses and supervisors. Understand that someone who is in your office has taken their children to a child care center, but if they're at home, there is a lockdown or whatever, they are also now taking care of those children. They are helping them if the connection to the classroom drops. And therefore, they are multitasking. So if that child who was sleeping suddenly rushes in and bombs your meeting, don't go hard on those workers, because even you as the boss, it can happen to you. We saw not long ago, or I think it was on one of these international media platforms, the CNN or BBC, where a CEO was being interviewed and the child just came and insisted that it's time for you to read my bedtime story until the interview had to be cut off. So I think in a nutshell, those are the reactions I have to the questions raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gamelihle Sibanda. Ladies and gentlemen, our participants, that was our Chief Technical Advisor in Employment Intensive Investment Program for the ILO.